Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar, excuse me, on how to prethink assumptions. My name is Rajat Sadana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. In this webinar, we're going to look at a core skill in critical reasoning, which is prethinking, and we're going to apply prethinking to assumptions. And so, because this webinar is probably 80% focused on application, we want to make sure that you have that foundation in critical reasoning, you have that foundation in assumption. So we did send a few video lessons your way. The 3 video lessons that probably are most critical to you getting the most out of this webinar are introduction to assumption, prethinking logical gap, and prethinking two entities. So if you've not gone through these video lessons, you should go through them. They are a part of your free trial. If you log into e-GMAT, you'd be able to just get to the free trial. We also have some upcoming free webinars. We have a free webinar on GMAT strategy, which is next Saturday. We also have a free webinar on algebra, which is next Sunday. So which you can attend these 2 webinars. And yeah, in the first webinar, we look at how do you create that personalized study plan to score a 760. In the second webinar, subject matter focused webinar, we discuss how do you ace GMAT algebra. So more specifically on inequalities and absolute value. Okay, with that, this is a fairly heavily attended webinar, and I appreciate all of those. If you are from India or an Indian, I appreciate you guys joining. I know it's Diwali tomorrow, and if you are from if you're not an Indian, if you're from other parts of the world, then I appreciate you joining. It's fairly early my time at 7 a.m. Phoenix, Arizona. Sure, those of you joining us from the US, it's fair, or South America, it's fairly early your time as well. So let's get to know you guys a bit better. So I have 2 questions for you. One is, what's your target GMAT score? The second is when do you plan to take the test? With more responses for when do you plan to take the test because it was there already. So based on the data that I have, what I see is a fairly balanced group. The biggest segment over here is those who have between a month and 45 days before the GMAT. But other than that, the smallest group over here is those who have the test in the next 15 days, the largest a month to 45 days. And then with regards to the target GMAT score, the biggest segment here is in the 710, 720 group. Very close second is a 730 to 750. And then we essentially have a few folks in the 660 to 700, and then but close to 20% of you in that 760 plus bracket. With that, let me go right into the webinar pane. The screen either will have changed for you or it will be in the process of changing for you. Okay, let me just put in a yes no poll to see whether each one of you can see CR1 prethinking for assumptions. Select yes if you can see CR1 prethinking for assumptions. Okay, perfect. For those of you who cannot see that, I just recommend that you join again. Usually when you join again, the problem does sort out by itself. There's essentially 3 parts of this webinar. In the first part, I'm going to do a brief introduction to e-GMAT. That's going to be about 12 minutes. In the second part, we're going to go right into the core of this webinar, where we're going to look at how to master prethinking. And then in the third part, if you have any questions that have not been responded to during this webinar, I'd be happy to take those questions on and respond to them. With that, let's get started with the first part of the webinar, which is an introduction to e-GMAT. Now, I asked this question, what's your target GMAT score? And about 40% of the group, of this group really said that their target GMAT score is 760, is 720 or higher. And while that may be the case, I can tell you that only 6% of the people get to those scores. And a good chunk of them, and this is despite the fact that median scores at top business schools continue to go up. In fact, I recently wrote an article which said that in today's world, scoring a 730 or higher is much more critical. In fact, it has close to $500,000 worth of ROI over that score of 700. Okay, so what is it that people who get to these scores do? A good percentage of them use e-GMAT. Why do I say that? When you look at the key stats on major forums, one is the number of verified reviews. The second is a number of success stories. You're going to find that e-GMAT accounts for more than 50% of verified reviews on GMAT Club. Also, a very similar story when it comes to the number of success stories. Uh, in fact, over the last 2 weeks, e-GMATers have accounted for 5 out of 6 success stories on GMAT Club's Shared GMAT Experience forum. So what makes our students more successful? I think there's one thing that makes our students more successful. It is our approach to GMAT preparation. And then when you think about the approach or the architecture of learning that we provide, so let's kind of look at the two dominant architectures of learning that exist in the world today, and the same architectures do exist in the test prep industry as well. So when you think about the two dominant architectures, one is what we call as the book-based architecture. The second is a private tutoring-based approach. Um, when you map most of the GMAT prep courses out there, whether they provide audiovisual instruction, whether they provide, quizzes and exercises, what you're going to find is that even though they provide all of those things, their core architecture is a book-based architecture. When you map e-GMAT to one of these two architectures, you're going to find that e-GMAT's much more closely aligned with the private tutoring architecture. Okay. So to really say why one architecture is better than the other in helping you ace an exam, such as the GMAT, let's kind of see how do you get to that score of 720 or higher, or a score of 730. The first thing that any individual who wants to get to that score needs to do is to create a path towards that goal. That path should really say, hey, which are the core areas that you need to work on? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? How much time would you need to work on those areas? And to what extent do you need to improve upon so that you get to that 730 score? Then you start working on those areas by learning the concepts and learning the application. And then you need to get so good at uh, at applying those concepts that you attain a level of mastery that puts you in that top 3, top 4 percentile of students. And you need to do this iteratively across all the areas that GMAT tests you on. Okay, and that leads to that 720 plus score. So let's see how a book-based approach tackles this problem. So and we're going to start with creating that study plan. When you study using books, you get a couple of templatized study plans, and you use one of those study plans to start studying for the GMAT. Now, books are a great source of learning concepts. The only problem that books have is that they don't give you feedback with regards to how well you've learned a concept. So when 1,000 people go through a chapter in a book, they learn to 1,000 different degrees, and a few of them cross the threshold of learning, others don't. But books don't tell them those who have and those who haven't. So overall, so that burden of validation remains completely with you as a student. One area where books don't do as great a job is teaching you how to apply those concepts. Just the very static architecture or static nature of book, it doesn't render very well into telling you, hey, while solving a problem, what do you need to do in step 1, what do you need to do in step 2, what do you need to do in step 3. And so people who resort to a book-based approach resort to solving actually hundreds and hundreds, in fact, thousands of questions. And they believe the more questions they solve, the more likely they're going to succeed, where actually data shows otherwise. And there's some who are able to master application, but there are many more who get left behind. And when it comes to that evaluation of mastery, people who follow the book-based approach take a ton of mock tests. And again, at onus of evaluation when it comes to that mock test is completely on the student. A private tutoring-based architecture works very differently. When you work with a private tutor, the first thing that a good private tutor does is creates a personalized study plan for you. And that personalized study plan is created based on an in-depth evaluation of your strengths as well as your weaknesses. In addition to that, that personalized study plan also contains the amount of time you need to spend on relevant areas and the target abilities that you need to hit over there. Then a private tutor would actually teach you concepts. And as you're learning those concepts, a private tutor will give you feedback on the concepts that you need to work on. Uh, One area where I think working with a private tutor makes the most difference is learning how to apply those concepts. The private tutor will actually tell you what you need to do in step 1, 2, and 3, and will give you feedback when and where you're faltering. And when it comes to evaluation of mastery, as you practice more questions, the private tutor would constantly evaluate you and give you feedback. And as you reach a certain threshold, a private tutor would make you move from one topic to the other because so that you can make the best use of your time. So what's the difference between these two approaches? While you're learning the same content, the extent of personalization, starting from defining where to spend your time, the extent of feedback is a lot more in a private tutor-based approach. And it's very clear why that approach would help you ace the GMAT much more effectively than a book-based architecture. So let's see, why do we really say that e-GMAT's built around this book-based architecture, whereas the private tutoring-based architecture, whereas most of the other courses are built around this book-based architecture. And we're going to start with the step number 1, which is defining a path towards that goal. And we're going to take a case study of a student who wants to go from a score of 600 to a 720. So it's a 120-point improvement. If you were seeking a 200-point improvement, or if you were seeking to go towards a score of 750, the process would remain very similar. So remember, what is the first step? Define a path towards that goal. So, and to do that, you've got to define your starting abilities in various subparts of quant and verbal, then define your target milestones in those subparts, and then you have to create what we call as a learning path that's personalized to your strengths and weaknesses. So how do you define your starting abilities? You take what we call as a sigma x mark. What does a sigma x mark do? It's an e-GMAT mark. It gives you analysis which is better analysis than what an ESR would give you. And it tells you your starting abilities in sentence correction, critical reasoning, reading comprehension, arithmetic, algebra, and geometry. So you get those 6 starting points, and these are 6 points which are defined precisely based on your performance on the test. The next step is to set milestones towards that 720 or 730 or so score. And we've built an AI-driven tool called Gmod Planner, which allows every student to build his or her personalized study plan. So how does this tool work? It takes in your current quant and verbal scores. It also then recommends for a score of 720 your target quant and target verbal scores. Now this is a recommendation based on this current student starting scores. For every student, this goes through about 10 to 15 combinations for each score before it recommends the most likely score. Then it takes on your starting abilities in both quant and verbal, and it defines your target abilities in quant and verbal. So to hit a Q50, this student should hit an 83rd percentile in arithmetic and algebra geometry, and an 89th percentile in SC, 84th percentile in CR, and a 68th percentile in RC. So when you combine the starting abilities and the ending abilities, this is what it looks like. You see 10 data points on the screen. And in quant, what you're looking to do is go from a 59th percentile in arithmetic to an 83rd percentile, and a 39th percentile in algebra to an 83rd percentile. Similarly, on verbal, uh, you can really see how the 3 starting abilities are mapped to the 3 target abilities. If you hit those target abilities, you hit that V38 and a Q50. It then defines how much time you would need to get to that score. And what you see on the left-hand side are your starting abilities, on the right-hand side are your target milestones, and the amount of effort you need over there. So when you see this, your entire GMAT journey is like a is essentially like a neatly laid out plan. It's as if you're looking in a crystal ball. And in your personalized GMAT preparation becomes these, achieving these milestones. You have to go from a certain starting ability in SC, certain starting ability in CR to those target milestones over here. It then generates a day-by-day plan for you, depending on how many hours you can spend um, on a weekday as well as on a weekend. So why did we spend upwards of a couple of thousand hours building this planner? It's so that each one of you gets his or her personalized study plan in 7 minutes or fewer. The next step that a private tutor does is it teaches you concepts, and as you're learning concepts he constantly evaluates you and gives you feedback on that. The e-GMAT learning platform is built on the same principle. This is a subject verb module in our sentence correction course. What you see over here is concepts on the left hand side, and each concept as you learn has an evaluation built into it. So when you're learning a concept, you get feedback as to how well you've learned that concept. Um, for example, this first concept over here, SV a green number, this particular student hasn't learned it really well. So this particular concept over here, and the system gives the student feedback as to, hey, you should revise this concept and so on and so forth. Similarly, um, always uh, so so and so because you get this feedback, what you can do is do a course correction right then and there and make sure that as you move forward, you've learned the stuff prior to that properly. In fact, we recently wrote an article which is what causes success on the GMAT, in which we compared 600 students, 300 students who aced the GMAT, 300 who failed, and this data at that granular level clearly tells a story of the students who aced the GMAT versus those who uh, who fail on it. Those who fail actually get poor scores over here, uh, and those who ace get scores of upwards of 80 percentage or higher. When you compare this to another offering, this is a popular course by Magoosh, what you're going to find is that A, it's not as comprehensive. B, there is no feedback built in over here. You're not evaluated on the learning as you learn. This time over here is not the time that you spent on those concepts. It's the time of the video. So the intent over here is just to provide you learning very similar to what a book does, and not to give you feedback to to evaluate how well you've learned. The next thing that a private tutor does is it teaches you application of concepts, and to do that, we've actually created an entity called an application file. So you learn the concepts, you learn how to apply that right then and there. We then evaluate your ability to apply the concepts on e-GMAT questions as well as on official questions. So every module has one or more application files. The benefit of this is you're not just learning concepts and then solving questions towards the end. You learn concepts and you solve questions. So every 2 hours, you're actually that application aspect is reinforced on you. And this is how every module is architected in the GMAT course. Again, when you compare this with the Magoosh course, what you find is there is no application file. There is a practice file which has no score over here. Again, the intent over here is just to give you practice and not to teach you application. The last piece is evaluation of mastery. So uh, uh, a private tutor constantly assesses your performance and gives you precise feedback on areas that you need to work on. And the reason why you need to do that is because when you're studying sentence correction or critical reasoning, your goal was to hit that 85th or 90th percentile. And so how would you know after you've done studying that you've actually hit that percentile? And for that, we've built what we call as ability quizzes, in which you take an SC ability quiz, you get a score, and not only that, you get analytics which identify the areas that you need to work on. Clearly, for this particular student, he or she needs to work on comparisons, and um, if she fixes her issues in comparison, you can really see how the student could get to that 90th percentile. And and so the nice thing about this is that this student can go back to the comparison module, revise that, and come back and take another ability quiz and do that round tripping in a day and a half, and be happy that that particular student, that he or she can get to that 90th percentile. So you can really see why we say most of the other courses are built around that book-based architecture, but the e-GMAT course architecture, the technology platform, is built around the private tutoring-based architecture. Who's created this course? Some of GMAT Club's topmost instructors have created this content, and instructors who've been reviewed a lot more frequently on GMAT Club. So while only 6% of the people get to that score of 720 or higher, you can really see why a good percentage of them use e-GMAT, or you can really see why 5 out of 6 success stories on GMAT Club over the last 2 weeks have been by e-GMATers. With that, I've come to the end of my introduction. I'm now going to go into the pre-thinking aspect, but if you want to stay updated with all things e-GMAT, you can connect with me on my LinkedIn. We post about 6 articles a week. We write about 6 articles a week, and you can also connect with students at top business schools over here. Okay. With that, let me just take a couple of questions which came in during the intro part. Um, So the first is, can you go full screen? Absolutely. If you click on the presentation pod, and you can go full screen at your own end if that's what you want to do. The second piece is, uh, what's the median score for top B schools? You know, just if you Google e-GMAT and MIM in top B schools, you should be able to get to that. Gmod Planner, yes, it's gmadplanner.com, and you'd have to schedule a consultation call with one of our Gmod strategy experts to do that. So yes, if you go to gmadplanner.com, you should be able to get to the study planner. Uh, how can you access Scholarinium? Just go from the menu, and Scholarinium is a quizzing platform where you have these ability quizzes. Just log into your e-GMAT account and go from the menu over there. Okay, with that, let's kind of get into the second part of it, which is, hey, how do you pre-think assumptions? So here's how this part is going to go about. We're going to look at how you currently approach critical reasoning. Then we're going to do a pre-thinking exercise. And in this exercise, I'm going to give you arguments, not full-length questions. And the goal would be to to understand the methodology, to understand how do we go about pre-thinking without our thoughts being disturbed by the information in the answer choices. Then we're going to apply pre-thinking to full-length questions. And as we do that, we're going to do that as a quiz first. So you're going to solve those questions, and then I'm going to approach them using pre-thinking. We're going to apply the negation test on the two closest answer choices. And then we're going to really see how can you become a skilled pre-thinker. So at a very high level, we're going to document how you prepare today. We're going to look at what's important to master assumption questions. And again, this pre-thinking is not just limited to assumptions. It extends all the way to evaluate, strengthen, weaken, fill in the blank type questions. And then a modified version of it also extends to boldface questions. Okay. So with that, let's look at how you approach pre-thinking, how you approach critical reasoning questions today, or more specifically, uh, assumptions questions in critical reasoning. That so if, there are two ways in which people approach assumption questions today. But before that, let's kind of look at what pre-thinking is. Um, Pre-thinking is thinking of one potential assumption in your mind in 15 seconds before looking at the answer choices. The three words and quotes are really important. So one is, we're not looking, the goal of pre-thinking is not to think of all the possible assumptions, but we are only focused at thinking one possible assumption. The second thing is, a skilled pre-thinker is able to do this in 15 seconds. Now, those of you starting, you probably will need a minute to do pre-thinking, and that's okay. But once you become a skilled pre-thinker, you only need about 15 seconds. And the third thing is, you do that before you start looking at answer choices. Once you read the content of answer choices, you can actually discard pre-thinking. Why? Because the additional information provided in answer choices, it tends to pollute your mind, and it tends to actually kill the entire pre-thinking process. Another distinction I want to make sure is that you understand is, pre-thinking is not the same as predicting the answer. We are not trying to predict the answer with pre-thinking. The only thing that we're trying to do is make sure that we comprehend the argument well enough so that we are able to understand the logic of the argument. And this distinction is really important because we're the first company to clearly identify what pre-thinking is, and every question that we solve is solved using pre-thinking. So we've actually close to 600 e-GMAT created questions in critical reasoning on our platform. Each of them has been solved using pre-thinking. Similarly, the solutions to official questions that we provide, each official question has also been solved using the pre-thinking approach. Okay. So which methodology do you follow? There are two methodologies that are dominant today. One is, you read the argument, you then go to the answer choices and do back and forth till you reach the best candidate, or you read the argument, you pre-think an assumption, and then evaluate the answer choices, coming back to the argument only when needed. Okay, let's get a few more responses to the poll question. Which methodology do you follow? I have upwards of 100 students here in the webinar. I'd like to really get at least 60 responses over here. I have 41, 45, 47, 50. Let's get 10 more responses. 51, 53, 56, 58, 60. Perfect. We broadcast results. 55% of the class follows methodology 1, which is what I call as the back and forth approach, and then about 46% of the class follows methodology 2. Okay, and then if you follow the pre-thinking methodology, the 46%, this question is just for the second group, which is about 46% of this class. The question is, where do you spend the biggest chunk of your time? If you follow the pre-thinking approach, where do you spend the biggest chunk of your time? And the three options are over here. Only if you follow the pre-thinking approach. This question is only for those folks. All right, let's get a few more responses. 3, 2, 1. We end the poll, broadcast the results. Reading and understanding the argument, that's where you should be spending the biggest chunk of your time. Thank you very much, guys. I'm really happy to see that. If you follow the pre-thinking approach, you should be spending the biggest chunk of your time on the argument. If you don't follow the pre-thinking approach, the biggest chunk of your time goes in selecting the correct answer, which is the back and forth. Ankur says, could you always pre-think? So that's a great question, Ankur. So I'll tell you, as a skilled pre-thinker, I'm able to precisely pre-think about 75 to 80% of the time. I'm able to coarsely pre-think 100% of the time. Um, and again, in about two questions, so in about 30 to 35 minutes, ask this question again once we have solved a couple of arguments, and I'm gonna then talk about what's the difference between a precise pre-thinking and a coarse pre-thinking. Does that? So good question, Ankur. Ask this question again in about 30 minutes or so, and then you get that more specific answer. But yeah, 75% precise pre-thinking, the other 25% absolutely coarse pre-thinking. So with that, let's understand what an assumption is. And to do that, let me put in a poll over here. So what is an assumption? Okay, let's get a few more responses. I've stopped broadcast results, guys, so that your responses are not uh, are not impacted by others. They're not colored by others. So once I get about 25 responses, I'm going to share the results. I have 20 right now. Let's get I have 22 responses. So when you type in your answer and press enter, I get the response, even though you don't get that feedback that have gotten the response, but it does come over. So press enter after you've written. Okay, and I also see people writing the responses in the Q&A pod. Guys, put them in the short answer pod. Let me broadcast results. Okay. Linking conclusion to premise, something that is employed that must be true to arrive at the conclusion. Educated guess based on provided info. Okay, good. Without which the conclusion does not stand. Okay, so decent answers, good answers is what I would say. Um, some much more specific, much more precise than others. But you have many of you have a coarse idea of what an assumption is. Some of you have a very precise idea of uh, uh, what an assumption is. Okay. Um, let me just show. Let's kind of take this argument over here. Um, and so why don't you take a look at this argument and tell me what does the author assume over here? So this is an argument which is very close to your heart. All of you want to get to an Ivy League school, or most of you, I'm hoping. Um, so let's take a look at this argument and tell me what does the author assume over here. Okay, let's get a few more responses. I have 22, 23. Let's get to 25 before I share results. Okay, 26 responses. Wonderful. Ivy League requires more than 500. Not getting a 500 means no admission. You need to score higher than 500. Okay, so good responses. Yes, thank you very much. So this shows that innately, once you understand the argument, you are able to figure out what an assumption is. So you are figure out the logic of the argument. So what's given over here is you're given a data point. It says, hey, Joe scored 500 on the GMAT. And then the author makes a conclusion. He says, therefore, he would not get admission into an Ivy League college. So if you kind of look at this with a more critical eye, what you're going to find is from that data point, the author makes a jump towards that admission into an Ivy League college. And as the author makes that jump, the author makes an assumption, which is that a score of 500 for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. And this is really important over here. So most of you caught that the score of 500 is not enough. But I think the one piece which is really important for you guys to recognize is this piece over here uh, for someone like Joe. Why? Because in the conclusion, the author is saying that he will not get admission into an Ivy League college. The author is not saying that the Prince of Saudi Arabia will not get admission. What he's saying is that Joe, as an individual, will not get admission into an Ivy League college. Okay. And is that clear, guys? The assumption has to be very closely tied to the conclusion over here. Okay. Now, with that, someone asked that question, how the hell do I know whether my pre-thinking is correct or not? This is what this session is all about. So we're going to tell you how would you figure out whether your pre-thinking is correct or not. There's essentially two characteristics. So with that, let's kind of understand the definition of assumption. An assumption is an unstated idea, so which means you can't infer that from the argument, that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Okay, so the first thing which is really important over here is that an assumption must provide new information. The second is the assumption must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Or in other words, without the assumption, the conclusion can be invalidated. Let's kind of visualize what this means. Okay. So think of the argument as this house with the conclusion as this roof. Now, what you see over here is, how many pillars do you see over here? How many pillars do you see over here supporting? The 3 pillars, and you can type your answers in the short answer pod. Now, each of these 3 pillars are supporting the roof, which is my conclusion. Now think of these 3 pillars as premises. Okay, premises is something. A premise is something that makes the conclusion more believable. Now, while each one of these 3 pillars strengthens, the roof, makes the roof stay upright, There's only one pillar that essentially is that is essential for the roof to stay upright. What it really means is that you can probably take these two pillars out and the roof would still stay upright. It may not be as strong, but it would still stay upright. And this essential pillar is what an assumption is. Okay. Another way to look at this is that you can essentially, let me just remove the annotation. Uh, Another way to look at the same thing is that if you remove this pillar, the roof would cave in, regardless of whether these pillars remain or not. Okay, so that's kind of that definition of an assumption, and so that's the must be true aspect of this essential pillar. Okay, so I just want to clarify that, because if you understand this, you can solve the most challenging question that the test will throw at you. So what does must be true mean? It means that if the information provided by assumption is not true, then the conclusion can no longer hold true, or the conclusion breaks down or is invalidated. Or by definition, the assumption must be true for the conclusion to remain valid. Now, many of you are thinking, okay, we know that. Why is Rajat emphasizing on this to this degree? Because as we solve questions, you're going to find that that you will forget this because you'd get stuck with the question. So let's extend this thought on this particular example. Let's understand, what does falsification of conclusion mean? Let me just clear the responses here. So same argument, Joe scored 500 on the GMAT. Okay. So what is falsification or invalidating the conclusion? How can you destroy this conclusion that therefore he will not get admission into an Ivy League college? You'll destroy this conclusion if Joe gets admission into an Ivy League college with a score of 500. Can everyone see this? Yeah, Joe got 500 and got admission into an Ivy League college, right? That's what we call as destruction of a conclusion. So then let's see whether an answer choice is correct or not. How do we evaluate that? We're going to look at the answer choice that we said was a correct assumption. And this was the answer choice that we said was a correct assumption. A score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. Then we ask ourselves, is it true? Which means, will Joe get admission into an Ivy League college, or will the conclusion break down if the statement to the left no longer holds true? So listen to it very carefully. So if the statement to the left, which is if this particular statement no longer holds true, then what becomes true? Its negated instance becomes true. Okay. So what is the negated instance of this? A score of 500 for someone like Joe becomes acceptable to Ivy League schools. And if that happens, what happens to my conclusion? My conclusion breaks down. Okay. Now some of you may be thinking, why do we say that if a statement is not true, then its negated instance automatically becomes true? How many of you are thinking that? Why do we say this? That if a statement is not true, its negated version automatically becomes true. Let's kind of take a few examples. There's just one person who's thinking that, or are there more? Okay. So let's take a few examples over here. If you say the statement is not true, by definition, the negated version becomes true. Let's take some examples. If you say Harvard has the best MBA program, and if you say this statement is not true, then what happens? By definition, are you not saying that an MBA program which is better than or as good as Harvard exists? Are you not saying that? If you said this statement is not true, right? Which is essentially the negated version of that particular statement. Let's take another statement. John runs faster than David. If you say that statement is not true, then by definition, what you're saying is that, hey, David is as fast or faster than John. Just by saying, hey, that's not true, you're also implying that. Ankur is saying, what's the inference? That's the inference, Ankur. Well, no, you can't say both can't run because we are the statement over here. This particular statement says John runs faster than David. So there's an inference over here that John runs. Okay, but again, the key thing over here is that when you say a statement is not true, by definition, what you're saying is its negated version becomes true. When someone says, hey, you say, I studied 2 hours for the GMAT, and someone says, no, that's not true, which means that the person is saying you did not study 2 hours for the GMAT, by definition. Or in other words, Google's the best company to work for. If someone says, no, that's not true, by definition, what it's saying is, hey, there's a better company or a company that's just as good to work for as Google is. Okay. And that's really important. That logic aspect of at the statement level is really important. Okay. Now let's look at must be true. So if while evaluating an answer choice, or while even pre-thinking, if that statement is the correct assumption, then what you're going to find is that the conclusion will break down in the presence of the negated version of the answer choice. And if you think about this, this is very, very, very logical. Why? If we go back to our house example, okay, remember that essential pillar piece over here. If we go back to that house example, if we say that this guy over here, and let's see if we can add some color to it. If we say that this guy over here is that essential pillar, then what should happen when you remove that pillar? What should happen when you remove that pillar? The roof should collapse, right? This thing should collapse, right? Which is essentially what we are saying. If a particular answer choice is the correct assumption, then the conclusion will break down in the presence of the negated version of that. Removing that pillar means making the negated version become true. Okay. And you may write this down, by the way, even though I'm going to share the PDF with you, but you may write this down too. If an answer choice is not the correct answer choice, okay, if it's not the correct answer choice, or if it's the incorrect answer choice, then the conclusion will not break down in the presence of the negated instance of that answer choice. Okay, again, let's take the house example. If you have this essential pillar, and forgive my drawing, and if you have this non-essential pillar, when you remove this, the roof should not break down. Why? Because it's a non-essential pillar. So let's kind of evaluate it. And same argument, we're going to take the statement, a score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. Okay, let's evaluate it. So this is a statement that someone says is the correct assumption, and we have to evaluate, hey, is this the correct answer choice? We say, is that must be true? Or we ask the same question, will the conclusion become invalid or break down if the statement to the left no longer holds true? So if this statement no longer holds true, its negated instance holds true, which means a score of 500 is considered or deemed as a good score. If that happens, then does the conclusion break down, which means does Joe get admission when a score of 500 is deemed good? The answer is absolutely not. Why? Because the conclusion over here, this conclusion is not dependent on whether the score is considered a good score or not. It's dependent on what the value of that score is. At this, you can have the same argument, replace 500 by 700, the argument would still stand. So again, you can really see what happens. This essentially what we are doing is applying the negation test. But it's really important to understand that if we understand that must be true, you'd be able to narrow down and get to the correct answer. For the correct answer, the conclusion will break down when you negate that answer choice. For the incorrect answer, nothing would happen to the conclusion. Okay. Worst case, it might be weakened, but it will not break down. And we're going to see examples of all of the all of these instances today. But now what we have is a pre-thinking exercise over here. We're going to we did a simple argument right now, but now what we're going to do next is we're going to do a more sophisticated argument, a more GMAT-like argument. I'm going to just give you that argument. I'm going to ask you to put your pre-thinking in. So I'm going to give you your argument. You're going to put in your pre-thinking. I'm going to give you actually not 2 minutes, but 3 minutes to do this so that you can do this really slowly. You can think through this. We'll record your answers in the short answer poll on the right hand side. Then I'm going to go through my way of doing pre-thinking. And I think we've already done all of the theory. So we're going to just spend a minute on it, no more than that. But we're going to get right to doing pre-thinking. And then we're going to evaluate some of your submissions. Okay. So there's certain core skills that you need to be able to do this well. You need to be able to identify facts and claims in the argument. You need to be able to understand the conclusion. You need to be able to figure out how the author arrives at that conclusion. And you already know what an assumption is. We've already gone through it. Those of you who falter, the reason why you would falter is because you would try and get through it quickly. You, rather than asking the right question which gets you the pre-thinking, you're going to really ask about, hey, what is the answer? Hey, what is the answer? Okay. But the thing which is there is those of you who get it right would do these right. Those of you who don't get it right or who falter on it, who struggle with it, would be because of one of these two reasons, or would be because you don't understand clearly what an assumption is. Okay. With that, let's look at our first argument. Get your pen and paper ready. Make sure you have a bottle of water because from now on the session is going to get more intense. And here is your first argument. I'm going to mute myself. All right, guys, get those answers in. You guys have had about 4 minutes. And one, we are citing the assumption. So get those answers in, guys. Last 15 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me broadcast the results. We have 20 answers. I got actually uh, but 4 really good answers. So 4 really good answers, which I would really say would match with the kind of answers you're going to see on the test. Okay. So let's kind of look at this. And the first thing that we need to do when it comes to figuring out what an assumption is, to figure out what a conclusion is. So I want you to tell me, and you're gonna see a poll with 4 statements. I want you to tell me which of these statements is the main conclusion. Now, in this argument, we only have 3 statements. I use this the same argument as the same poll for another argument. So in terms of the process, what we're going to do is you're going to first understand what the conclusion is, then understand the logic of the argument, and then we're going to ask pre-thinking questions. Okay. So what is the question that we need to ask to figure out what the assumption would be? That question comes directly from that definition of what an assumption is. And an assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to remain valid. So if an assumption must be true for the conclusion to remain valid, then an assumption, or in other words, what we are really saying is without the assumption being there, the conclusion will break down. So this means that the assumption is built around those scenarios that break the conclusion down. If the assumption is that essential pillar, then that pillar, you pose that pillar in places where the roof is going to cave in, right? Does that make sense? If the conclusion breaks down without an assumption, then the assumption must be built around those scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down, right? Okay, so to find the assumption, all we need to do is find these scenarios. That's basically it. So then how do you find these scenarios? You look at the argument and you ask the question, under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? Okay. Now, why are we asking this question? Why? Because the assumption is an unstated idea, which means it's not there in the argument. And when you do that, the assumptions would come forward right away. So let's evaluate our argument. Statements 1, 2, and 3. Which of these statements do you think is the right conclusion, is the main conclusion of the argument? And please ignore statement number 4. Why? Because there is no statement 4 here. Or what does the author want you to believe? What does the main conclusion do? It really is the statement that the author wants you to believe. Let's get a few more responses. Which statement is the main conclusion? Five, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to end the poll. Last chance before you get those answers in. Which statement is the main conclusion? Okay, end the poll, broadcast the results. 38 or 57% of you said it's statement 2, and which is absolutely correct. Statement 2 indeed is the main conclusion. But there are the 43% of you who say either statement 1 and 3. And it's really important for you to understand, if you're going to solve a critical reasoning question properly, you've got to identify the statement that is the main conclusion. Now, let's understand what each of these statements is. So statement 2 is the main conclusion. This is what the author wants you to believe. Remember, the main conclusion always belongs to the author. And what does the author say? The difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system for the former. What the author really is not disputing the difference between professors and those other full-time lecturers, or what it's saying is what is causing that difference. And that's what he wants you to believe. He says the reward system for the former is causing that difference. Okay, what is statement one? Statement one is simply a context. It says that, hey, there's something that a research paper concluded, that tenured professors enhance student learning less than full-time lecturers outside the tenure system do. This is not what the author is concluding. This is what a research paper is concluding. Remember, the main conclusion always belongs to the author. And this part over here is written to support our statement number 2. When you read the statement, it says the criterion for rewarding tenured faculty places greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Okay, then this is there to make you believe in statement 2, to increase your belief in statement 2, to say for tenured faculty there's a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Let me hide this. Let me For those of you who chose statement 1 or statement 3 as the main conclusion, when you look at this slide, is that clear to you? Why statement 2 is the main conclusion? It's the conclusion that the author wants you to believe. Is that clear? Can I get a few more yeses? And if you say no, it's unclear, that one person, and you can put in the question in the poll as to why do you think it's unclear? Why do you believe that the author of the argument wanted you to believe something else? Yes, clearly is a conclusion marker as well. That's true. And who said that? Alec, yes, absolutely Alec. Okay, now let's look at the pre-thinking question. Remember the general structure of the question was, under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? Okay, let's kind of morph this question into the context of this argument. Under what circumstances would the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance? Okay, difference in performance, given that full-time lectures enhance student performance greater than professors do, and the reward system for performance places greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Yes. Is the pre-thinking question clear? Is the pre-thinking question clear? The answer to this question will tell you where the conclusion falters, and a couple of you actually gave me the correct assumption while I was showing this question. That was great. Okay. So let's kind of post this question over here. Under what condition will the reward system not cause a difference between the tenured and non-tenured, given that the reward system for tenured faculty places greater emphasis on research? What are some of the falsifying scenarios? Okay, one of them is if the non-tenured faculty has similar emphasis on research. Okay, that's really important to understand this piece over here. Remember, we're not disputing the difference between tenured and non-tenured. What we are trying to figure out is what is causing that difference. And if non-tenured also has an identical reward system, then you can't blame the reward system, then something else has to be responsible. Is that clear? Is that clear, guys? Okay, perfect. Or another argument would be, if most tenured professors do not act as per the reward system. Okay, you can put in a reward system, but if tenure professor says, hey, our actions are not dependent on our reward system, the majority of them says that, then you can't blame the reward system. There's something else that must be causing this. So if both of these are falsifying scenarios, then what are the possible assumptions? Non-tenured faculty does not have the same reward system, or most tenured professors care about the reward system. Can you really see when you ask the falsification question, the falsifying scenarios come up very, very clearly. And then once you have those falsifying scenarios, your assumptions are right then and there. And this is very different from the answers that a majority of you put in over there in the short answer pod. There are a couple of you who put in good answers, but other than that, this is very different. But it's not rocket science. If you ask the right question, these are logical answers. Can you see this, guys? Yes, no, in the short answer pod? Perfect. Okay, that's a great one. Research does not lead it to enhanced learning. Andrew, if you were to make this a very difficult question, that is an answer choice. Okay, let me draw a parallel. I was thinking about this morning, about 30 minutes before this, whether I should take this on or not. Since you posed this, we'll take this on. Okay. But I want to answer one question before Anku's question. He says, do we need to find all the falsifying scenarios, or only one is good to read answers? Just one is fine, Ankur. Good question again. Okay. So let's kind of take two guys over here, and I would want you guys to the thing that we're trying to figure out is this falsifying scenario that I think Andrew put in over here. He says research does not result in enhanced student learning. Okay, let's kind of take two guys, and because I can't draw circles on this tool very well, I'm gonna really make it much more robotic, these guys, so forgive me. So let's say here's Andrew, and okay, and I'm going to take John. Andrew, since you asked this question, I've got to make you the scapegoat here. So here is John. Okay, now both Andrew and John work out. Okay, both of them work out, and both of them are competing. Now let's kind of do something over here. And bear with me because I don't have this prepared. Andrew works out his upper body. Okay, and John works out his lower body. Lower body is, the one below the legs and other things. All right. The scenario is clear? Yes, no? Let me just reopen the poll. Is the scenario clear? Andrew works out his upper body. John works out his lower body. Okay. Now Andrew and John race, and Andrew and John race, and who do you think is going to win? John's going to win. Most likely John. Okay, why? And let's say most likely why? Because he works on his legs. Yes, running legs are more involved. Now, is that a fair assumption? And again, I've not put the argument correctly, but is that a fair assumption that working, and let me actually put this over here so that I have more real estate. Is that a fair assumption that working on upper body does not strengthen legs? If this happens, then is that a fair assumption? No, why? No, forget about the endurance and other pieces. Let's kind of, just for simplicity. Andrew, tell me, is that a fair assumption? And again, please ignore the other endurance pieces and everything. Let's assume everything else. Forget about common sense also. Just from this part. Yes and no. Okay. No, it isn't. The answer to that is no, it's not a fair assumption. Why? Because let's say working on upper body does strengthen legs, but do you think, and let's kind of make this guys Andrew, and I'm going to move the short answer pod over here. And again, that's why I said this is a difficult concept. So it's a comparative concept. So this guy is our Andrew, and this guy is John. Now let's say working on upper body, here is my upper body, does strengthen legs to a degree X. But is that degree X the same degree that you would strengthen your legs if you work on legs directly? Is that degree X the same degree that you would strengthen if you worked on just legs? No, probably not. Probably not. So in the same way, emphasizing on research can help you be a better teacher, but not to the same degree where if you emphasize on something else. You understand? We're talking about comparative performance. When you talk about comparative performance, the assumptions have to be comparative, not absolute. This answer choice does not strengthen legs is an absolute answer choice. You understand the difference? Okay. Yes, it's all in the context of what the comparison is. Okay. Andrew got it. We're going to solve a couple of questions and then I think this would come out because this comparison piece is tested very frequently. Okay. Juan says, what's a comparative assumption? It's not a comparative assumption, but Juan, what are we comparing over here in this argument? What are we doing in this argument? We are comparing the performance of two people, right? Tenured professors and non-tenured professors. Correct? Juan? You can put your answers. Right? So, okay, Juan has put your answers. And so when you're talking about the emphasis on research, you're going to have to compare. If I did not emphasize on research as a tenured professor, what else would I have spent my time on, and essentially the impact that would have had. Okay. So it's the argument by itself, the conclusion by itself is comparative. So your answer in absolutes is not going to be your correct answer. Okay, so guys, let's move forward. But the thing that I want to make sure you understand is when you ask the pre-thinking question, you can start to see those falsification scenarios. And when you start to see those falsification scenarios, that's when assumptions start to come to you. Okay. This is an easy one. If you guys did the other one, this one should be fairly easy. So I'm going to leave this. I'm going to give you the PDF. But then I saw some requests for, hey, how do you go about doing the negation test? Komal, if you can share the link to this article in the Q&A pod, that would be great. If you can get that from the PDF or from the web. Okay, so let's talk about pre-thinking and timing. Okay, how is it that you're going to feel? So how many of you think, man, this seems to take a lot of time? How many of you think that? This seems to be taking a ton of time. I'm really worried. Okay. And when you're thinking of a new process, when you really do this, you're gonna that's something that's gonna happen. Initially, you will be slow. Initially, your time to answer questions will be high. And let's kind of look at this piece over here. So let's say, and this is the journey that you're gonna have. Let's say you're someone who's starting at point number one, where your accuracy is low and your time to answer questions is medium. And these are these are relative numbers over here, not absolute. Why? Because given the 100 people in this class, everyone's going to be at a different point. The first thing that you're going to experience is the moment you start embracing pre-thinking, your time to answer questions is going to go up, your accuracies is going to go up as well. But it, having known 40,000 students or so, uh, you're not going to be happy about that accuracy going up. What you're going to be worried about is, man, why am I following this approach? This seems to take a lot longer. And I'm already worried about timing on the verbal section of the GMAT. Okay. If you continue doing that, there are two things that are going to happen. Your accuracy is going to continue to improve. You're going to solve more and more difficult questions correctly. You're going to pretty much solve all easy and all medium questions correctly. And your time to answer questions will go down drastically. And then you would say, now I understand why should I embrace pre-thinking. Now I understand the benefits of it. Um, and as you continue to do that, uh, what you're going to find is that again, that time continues to go down, that accuracy continues to go up. And if you go and read debriefs on GMAT Club, share GMAT Experience Forum, you're going to see that over there. And they're going to see at least 100 instances where people have experienced this score. Okay. Um, and that's something which is really important to trust this process. When you're learning a new thing, you're learning a new skill, you initially will take longer. I mean, that's the whole process of learning. But once you learn, you get much better. Your performance would be a lot higher. Let me, excuse me, share a very recent case study. This is last week. A student actually shared his data. So here's a guy who improved from 700 to 770. And when he had a 700 score, he had a verbal score of 34. He also had a critical reasoning ability of 39 percentile. I'm going to just draw this over here. So this guy, when he had a critical reasoning ability of 39 percentile, did not do pre-thinking. In 3 weeks, you know, we had an intervention with him. We actually told him, you've got to pre-think. And in 3 weeks, the guy improved from a V34 to a V42 over here. And the improvement, a good chunk of that improvement came through critical reasoning. The second piece was in sentence correction, where he improved from a 63rd percentile to a 94th percentile. Okay, and again, this was through the meaning-based approach. Now, do you notice something about this, about the timing piece over here? What can you observe? And what can you infer? When he was not doing pre-thinking, his time to answer critical reasoning question was 2 minutes 3 seconds. Now this guy, remember, this is 39 percentile in critical reasoning. He was getting easy to medium questions in critical reasoning. When he scored 94th percentile, his time to answer question at an aggregate level went down by about 5 seconds. Okay. This is despite the fact that he was getting the hardest questions on critical reasoning. When you score a 94th percentile, you get the toughest questions over there. And as you go and download his ESR, what you're going to find is he did make mistakes. Okay. He did make mistakes, but because he made mistakes on hard questions, he was still able to get to a V42. Okay. And that's really important. And you can get to his ESRs from here. You can bookmark this link. And pre-thinking is really important for RC. Yes. Okay. So as I said, this is the journey that you're gonna follow. This is the journey that he followed, and you can really see how quickly you move from one level to the other if you're deliberate. In fact, in fact, if you go and read this entire thread, towards the end, there's a student whose I think his name is his GMAT club username is Plan Drive, and and what you're gonna really see is that this guy again didn't EG Matter did not embrace pre-thinking, read this debrief, started embracing pre-thinking in 3 days. 3 days scored 740, and now he's looking to score higher. And this is not the only instance. As I said, there are upwards of 100 instances. Um, Here's another example of a student who scored a 740. He said, understand the passage completely. Take your time. Equally important, pre-think and answer before looking at the answer choice. Probably this one word will have the most impact on your GMAT score. Another student says, this pre-thinking primes the mind and we are constantly on our toes while reading an RC paragraph. Also, someone who said RC pre-thinking is important for RC, absolutely. Or a CR question stem. Apart from comprehending the passage, we keep speculating that in which direction the passage will orient and or what logical jump has the author taken. Again, 220 point score improvement. So with that, we're going to take the second example, and the beauty of the second example is that it's it's a very simple logic. The logic of this question is really simple. It's a full length question. If you understand what you're looking for, you'd be able to narrow down the answer choices. The other piece which is there is, as you're evaluating the answer choices, remember an assumption is something that must be true for the conclusion to hold to stay valid. So it'll really hone in that must be true piece over there. Okay. So let's get the answer choices here. Let me reopen the poll. I'm going to give you again plenty of time, 3 minutes to solve this question. Here is the question. You guys get 3 minutes to solve this. All right, guys, last 15 seconds, get those. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll. Let me broadcast the results. So we have a lot of what we call as a split theory, where people are confused between choices B, D, and E, boy, delta, and echo. So let's see which one's the correct answer. And as I said, a very simple argument, but the answer choices make it confusing. But let me first ask this question. What is the precise definition of an assumption? What's the precise definition of an assumption? Something, an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Just remember this. If you negate it, it destroys the conclusion. Yes, an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Negation of that idea destroys the conclusion. So let's first worry about this. What's the conclusion over here? Okay, but can you just say it in your words? I understand it's in two, but I want to make sure that you feel the conclusion. So it'd be very nice if you could type it out. The total toll will increase by at least 50% over here. Okay, will increase by at least 50%. Okay, good. Everyone understands that. That's really nice. So how do we estimate the annual revenue? In a simple relationship, how do we do that? Okay, tolls time price. Okay, number of miles times the toll per mile. Essentially, profit minus cost. I have never heard the term profit minus cost. I've heard revenue minus cost as profit, but profit minus cost is a term that I've not heard. But yes, miles multiplied by tolls per mile. Annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by the total number of toll miles. Is that clear for everyone? Is that clear? Okay. We are not charged per mile here. Okay. 10 cents per mile toll. Ankit, can you see that? You are charged per mile here. Okay. So the annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by total number of miles. So what else do we know given what else is given in the argument? This is an official question, by the way. What else is given in the argument? So, okay, the price increase being considered. So what is this going up by? Toll per mile. How much is this increasing? By 50%. Okay. And what do we want this to go up by? Is by 50%, at least. Okay. We want this to go up by at least 50%. All right. And who said, I like that statement. Andrew said, so if miles go down, the collapse of that pillar. I love that, Andrew. That is good. Okay, so the only way this conclusion breaks down is if the total number of toll miles go down. Is that clear? Right? If the total number of miles traveled on the toll decreases. Is that clear? That's the only thing. Is this question hard difficulty? The answer choices seem to say that, yes. The way you've chosen the answer choices. What's the assumption? The total number of miles traveled does not decrease, right? The assumption clear? If this is the scenario that falsifies my conclusion, the assumption is this scenario doesn't exist, which is okay. We're going to look at the answer choices. So, Mariam, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're going to get there. Okay. So, which answer choice attacks the total number of miles directly? Which answer choice does that? Which answer choice does that? Which must be true? It's answer choice E. The total distance traveled by vehicles will not decrease from its current level. Let's look at why B and D are both wrong. Because B, D, C, and D, all three of them are what I call as strengtheners but not assumptions. B, C, and D are all choices that are designed to confuse you. They're all strengtheners but not assumptions. And by looking at the answer choices, it seems that they did confuse you. Okay. Here are the answer choices. Here is how you guys polled. You can see choice B, the first one. A lot of you just marked and didn't even worry about evaluating it. So a few said maybe let's evaluate the next one, went to choice C and chose it. A few went to choice D and chose it. And then those of you who wanted to make sure that every choice is correct, you went till choice E. And then you realize, man, this is the correct answer. Okay, let's look at why choice B is incorrect. And once you understand why choice B is incorrect, you're going to really understand why choice C is incorrect, and you're going to understand why choice D is incorrect as well. Once again, what is the definition of an assumption? It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold valid. Remember this as we evaluate choice B. Choice B says the total number of trips made on the toll highway per year will not decrease from its current level. Okay. The question that you have to ask is, does this mean that the total number of miles traveled on toll roads would decrease? Does it mean that? Can you answer this with a yes or no? No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. Okay. So then is that a must be true? Is that a must be true? Because remember, what was our must be true over here? No, it is not a must be true. Okay, and as I said, if you understand that definition of an assumption, you'd be able to answer each and every question. Okay, is option A an inference? I don't know what option A is. Let's kind of take a look at that and then we're going to look at it. The amount of money required for road repairs. In the conclusion, do we care about the amount of money? No, that has nothing to do with the conclusion. It's just some context. It could go up, it could go down. I wouldn't care. It's about the revenue. Now, let's look at choice D. A lot of people really said the number of drivers who consistently avoid the highway will not increase. By the same logic, can you really say, hey, this isn't must be true? Let's say this number of drivers increases by 5%. Does it mean that the total number of miles driven on the highway would go down? No, not really. By the same logic that you'd reject choice B. Average length of the trip. Yes. Why not C? Can anyone tell me why not C? Let's say the average length of the trip went from, let me just see. The average length of the trip went from 10 miles to 9. Right? Let's say that happens. What if more drivers come on the highway? Yes. It doesn't mean that the total number of toll miles will go down. Okay. Again, remember, an assumption is something that must be true for the conclusion to hold valid. Okay. In other words, one of the things that should be forming in your mind as you see these questions, and I'm going to remove the short answer part, is we have to focus on this total miles. Okay. Sorry, wrong annotation. We have to focus on this part, total miles. So what is total miles? And I'm going to write it down over here. Let me get my keyboard. Miles is equal to total miles is length of the trip multiplied by number of trips, right? Even if the average length went down, what if the average number of trips went up? Total miles will still remain the same. The important thing that you have to ask is that must be true? And the answer to that is no. Why? Because there's a potential compensating factor. Is that clear? Guys, yes, no? Okay. Um, Ankur has a very important point, and he says every word counts in questions like this, where he says I miss per mile, and how do you make sure that you get a hang of every word also in the given time frame? That's a great question, Ankur. And there are two responses to that, because first of all, I think this is a question that's relevant to everyone. The first thing is develop a habit of reading slowly. Okay. And when you develop a habit of reading slowly, you're going to reduce the propensity of something like this happening. And to develop that habit, you have to read a sentence, summarize it, read a sentence, summarize it. So um, as you solve 50 to 70 questions and you do this, you're going to kind of automatically understand uh, where to focus, where to emphasize on. And you develop what I call as your visualization skills. If you go to a YouTube channel, you're going to see about 100 interviews with successful students. And these are not endorsements. These are, 30, 35-minute unedited interviews where I talk about their GMAT journeys. And you're going to realize that that the ability to visualize this, the ability to read slowly is a commonality across them. The second piece is even when that happens, there would always be a couple of instances where you will miss it. We are human and to error is human. And at that point in time, the one thing that you have to always believe in is trusting the test. The GMAT is such a beautifully designed test that it would not throw something at you that does not make sense. So if you've read the argument, if you've looked at the answer choices and things do not make sense to you, then the most likely reason that something doesn't make sense to you is because you missed something while reading the argument. Go back and read the argument, and you would find that piece. Okay. So that's something which is really important. So first is develop the habit to reduce the propensity. And in the unlikely case that this happens, trust the test, go back and read the test again, read the argument again. Now, in e-GMAT, we've created about 4,000 verbal questions. When we evaluate, before we put a question into production, how many attempts do you think we see on a question before that's put into production? Okay, close to 150. So it's not 1,000. It's 1,000. So statistically, you are within 5% accuracy once you have 100 unbiased attempts. So we go to 150, we get to within 3% accuracy. So 95, 97% certainty is what we get into. And when you're testing a question like that, what really happens is we create a question. We say, okay, in my opinion, I say this is a medium difficulty question, and I believe people would get confused between these two answer choices. When you get 100 to 150 attempts, if the difficulty level turns out to be very hard, we have 5 levels of difficulty, then essentially there has to be something wrong with the question, because it's very rare for me to be 2 levels off. I can be one level off, but it's very rare to be two levels off. Or if I find that people are getting confused with another answer choice, the answer choice that I'd not expected people to get confused with, then I look at it, reevaluate it, see if there's something to be fixed, fix it, retest it, and then put it again. That's the same thing that the GMAT does. Uh, when they really say, hey, we spend $1,000 per question, it's not because they're spending $1,000 to create the question. Creating a question is about 3 hours of effort. But to test it out and to make sure that it's calibrated properly, that's what takes that amount of time and that amount of money. Who are the samples that we are testing? We tested about 4 different channels. We test them on GMAT Club for a short amount of time. We test it through our internal student body, where as well as to our registered users. But these questions don't go in a production system; they go in a separate test system. So, if you were a registered user with us sometime in December of last year, you would have seen us testing about 800 questions over there. So yeah, GMAT test takers. Okay, with that, yeah. So when we were creating those questions or Sigma X mocks, then that's when we were evaluating those questions. Okay, so next set of questions. Now these questions are difficult, so let's reset ourselves. Let's understand what we learned. One is read the argument slowly. The second is trust the test. The third is always ask the pre-thinking question. Okay. Now, make sure you have a pen and paper because we are going to go into two questions, very, very difficult ones. The first one, RDS technologies. And what I'm going to do is, because these questions are difficult, I don't want to time you guys. So I want you to select this thing called not answered. Okay, so that I know how many of you, once you change your option answer choice to another option, how many of you have actually answered that question. Okay, let's get about 50 people to say not answered. I only have 17 of you who are saying not answered. Let's get a few more, guys. So that way, I don't time you. You as a group time you. Okay, 35. Can we get at least 5 more, guys? 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I want you to select the option not answered so that I know when you choose another option, you're actually done with the question. That way, you as a group time yourself. I don't time you guys. Okay, choose not answered. All right, let me remove broadcast results. Here is your first question. Do get a pen and paper, Ankur. You would need, there's a reason why you have a scratch pad, yes. So please get a pen and paper and good luck. Okay, 60% of the class is done, guys. Let's take another 30 seconds or so. Okay, almost 80% of the class is done. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. You guys can see, choice D really popular, choice A popular, choice B is also popular. So we a split jury again. As I said, it's a difficult question. I'm going to hide the poll over here. I'm going to put in the next poll. And again, as before, I want you to select not answered so that I know how many of you are going to actually attempt the question and I can time this group accordingly. So let's get to not answered. Let's get 40 people to not answered, guys. 28, 30. 33, 35. Let's get 5 more. Again, the more you people participate, the more representative my sample is going to be. All right. I'm going to remove broadcast results. Here is your argument. Good luck. Okay, guys, half the class. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Let me broadcast the results. So what we see over here is choice D to be really popular, choice A and choice E are really popular as well. So again, a split jury, and no clear majority here. So let's kind of see how we go about approaching these questions. Now, as I mentioned earlier, both these questions, difficult questions, challenging questions, each one of these questions has a certain trait which is really important when it comes to solving difficult questions on the GMAT. So let's look at this. This is a question which is, let's say, the logic in this question is about medium complexity. The terminology in this question really complex. There are lots of terms over here. So let's kind of move forward over here. So I'm going to show all the statements over here. So the conclusion says the number of Erlanders receiving special program information in the year did not increase significantly between the year 1996 and 1998. 1994 and 1996, my bad. So there's certain things to observe over here. Okay, first of all, we're talking about this time period. Okay, the second thing to observe here is that we're talking about special programs. Okay, and we're talking about Verlanders. So any answer choice that, so if that's the conclusion, then the assumption also has to be concerned with special programs. The assumption also has to be related to what happened during this time period. Why? Because the assumption and conclusion are very closely related. Does that make sense? If the conclusion talks about special program, the assumption has to be related to that. If the conclusion talks about 94 to 96, then the assumption has to be related. I mean, because why? The goal of the assumption is it's an essential pillar that is required for the conclusion to hold true, or that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Okay. There are two things that happen between 96 and 94. One is the number of receiving radios. These are the radios that people have to listen to programs. It did not change a whole lot. If there were 1,000 radios in 94, there are about 1,000 radios in 96. And the number of transmitting stations actually more than doubled. They went up from 250 to 600 between 94 and 96. And the first statement says that, hey, if you want a special program, you need two things. You need radio stations, which are the transmitting stations with RDS technologies, and you need radios or receiving radios, which people have with the RDS features. Is the argument clear to you? So essentially, if you want to get a special program, you need both the things. I need a radio station that's transmitting with RDS technology. I need a receiving radio which has the RDS feature in there. Okay, clear? Yes. Can I get a few more yeses just to make sure everyone's clear with this? All right. Okay, let's kind of create what we call as a logical structure. So this is slightly complex. So what we're saying is between 94 and 96, very few additional Verlanders, and for some reason, this tool removes I's and L's from text. Okay, so what happened between 94 and 96? Number of radios remained almost unchanged. Number of RDS stations increased a lot. And the context is to receive RDS programming, you need RDS radio station. And based on this, we are saying very few additional Verlanders receive RDS programs. So let's do our falsification question. So the falsification question would be, under what conditions will there be a significant addition to the number of people receiving RDS programming despite very few additional receiving radios and with a lot of more stations? What are the scenarios in which I can break the conclusion down? Can you guys tell me? What are my falsification scenarios? Greater coverage. Yes, the new stations, if they add more coverage, that's going to break it down. Yes, that's good. Yes, and then the top three are saying the exact same thing. They're good reasons. I love that. What is another way? Increase in household members. Yes, if people per radio go up, that will also break my conclusion down. So the possible scenarios are if the additional stations now cover areas where there was no coverage earlier, but where people did have the right kind of radio, or if far more people listen to every radio. If you start putting these radios in Starbucks, then yes, people per radio will go up. Okay. Can you see the falsification scenarios? Do both of them make sense? You guys came up with them. And then again, that's the power of pre-thinking. When you ask the right question, getting to the right answer becomes this. All right. Now, so what are my assumptions? My assumptions are the new stations do not increase the coverage significantly and people per radio remain about the same. These are my assumptions. Do the assumptions make sense as well? Yes, no? If you got the pre-thinking, the assumptions are fairly simple. Now, let me get in the poll over here for this one. Here is how you guys answered for this. Choice D was very popular and choice D wasn't correct. Choice A is the correct answer. We're going to really see why each of the answer choices, whether they're correct or incorrect, and the reason for the same. Choice A says, and choice A is fairly complex. It says few, if any, of RDS stations that began broadcasting after 1994 broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached by RDS stations. This is essentially a complex SC sentence. This could be in the SC part of the GMAT. So let's kind of decipher it. Few, if any, means almost none of the RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94. In the context of this argument, they are the new radio stations. They are the ones that are deployed between 94 and 96. Broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached. So if you really read this part slowly, what you're going to really say, what you're going to understand is that what it's saying is almost none of these radio stations increase the range. Okay, that's what this is saying. None of these radio stations increase the range of RDS programming, which is in line with our pre-thinking one, right? This is in line with our pre-thinking one. Read this again. This is really important. Okay, let's apply the negation test to this guy over here. If you negate this answer choice, it says at least some of the radio stations increase coverage. Now, what happens if at least some of the radio stations increase coverage? What happens to our conclusion? It falls apart. Conclusion breaks. I'm going to give you 20 seconds with this slide so that you guys can read this, make sure you get it. Then I'm going to move to choice B, choice C, choice D. We're going to address each and every choice here so that you know when you make a mistake, why you make a mistake. Yes, after 94, 94 to 96, that's after 94, right? In the context of this argument, that's the world, 94 to 96. We'll see every choice. Don't worry about other choices. Right now, worry just about this choice. We're going to evaluate each and every choice independently. Okay. Let's look at choice B. Now, what is my definition of an assumption? What's my definition? An unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Good. I like when you say both the aspects of it. Okay, let's now look at choice B. What does choice B say? Choice B says, in the year 1996, most Worldlanders who lived within the listening area, and let's go there. In the year 1996, most Worldlanders What does the word most mean? Mathematically or logically? Greater than 50%, more than half. Yes, absolutely. Right? Most means more than half. So what this answer choice is saying is, in word length, let's call it in V, if more than 50%, so let's say 60% of our landers had already had a radio equipped to receive RDS. So essentially, since we know from the argument that number of radios did not change a whole lot between 94 and 96, you can also say, hey, it's reasonable to say that even in 94, what this is saying is 60% of them had the RDS radio. Okay. Now, what is my conclusion? What is my conclusion? The conclusion is saying between 94 and 96, the number of landers does not increase a whole lot. Now tell me one thing, is it required that 60% of the world landers, is it required that 60% of world landers have RDS radios for this conclusion to hold true? What if this number were 20% in 94 and 20% in 96? No, it's not required, right? Which is why this answer choice is incorrect. Now, if you chose this answer choice, you have to ask yourself, why did I not think about this? Why did I not really that definition of assumption? Remember, every time you're confused, I just ask you the definition of assumption. It's that simple statement that you have to comprehend and keep in mind. In other words, if you apply the negation test to this and say, hey, what if majority of world landers did not have an RDS radio in 96? Will my conclusion fall apart? And the answer to that is no. Negating this does not break my conclusion. Does it make sense, guys? Again, it's deep thinking, but it's very logical. There's nothing complex about it. It's deep, but not complex. If you focus on a few things, you will get this. Choice C, and let's get some stats. How many of you chose choice C? Let's get the stats over here. Not very many, about 11%. Now, equipping a radio station with RDS technology does not decrease the station's listening area. Now, very simple. When it comes to special programming, and I'm focusing on special programming only, why? Because our conclusion worries about it. When it comes to special programming, if a station does not have RDS technology, what is the range of special programming from that radio station? If a certain radio station has no RDS technology, can it broadcast special programming? Can it broadcast? Yes, no? It cannot, right? We are told that a radio station should have special programming. So if a radio station does not have RDS technology, then what is the range of special programming from that radio station? 0. Yes, it's a really important number. 0. So which programming does this worry or does this impact? It's non-special programming. And we don't care about non-special programming in our conclusion. Our conclusion has absolutely no relationship to that. Is that clear? Why choice C is incorrect? Okay, can I get a few more yeses, please? Now I'm going to go towards choice D. And when you see choice D, you're going to really see. I'm going to give you an opportunity to tell me why choice D is wrong. There are 2 reasons why choice D is wrong. Let me just clear the results. Think about it. You have to focus on understanding the conclusion first, then reading the choice in the context of that conclusion. I'm going to give you a few more seconds. Okay. Yes. Who said that? Let me just look at this. Juan, thank you very much. Great response. He says it's discussing people who did not own RDS equipment radius, which is irrelevant. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to really talk about two things. First is the segment of people he discusses. People who did not own radio equipment to receive RDS. And the second piece is any programming. My question to you is, do we care about this? Do we care about people who do not own the right kind of radios? The second thing is, when it comes to our conclusion, do we care about any programming? No. The conclusion has nothing to do with people who don't have the right radio. Why? Because only people uh, who have the right radio can receive special programming. And again, we don't care about any programming. And who? Let's see. Mariam, good reason for you as well. Thank you. Choice E, I'm not going to worry as much about choice E. But again, one thing that you really saw in terms of your takeaways was, if you focus on the conclusion, if you focus on pre-thinking, only choice A had relevant information. Yes, this was complex. Yes, this was probably the most complex question you're going to see out there. But even the most complex question was not ambiguous. It had one correct answer. Everything else was blatantly wrong. Now tell me one thing. Why did you guys make a mistake, those of you who did? What caused that mistake? Okay, pressure. Okay. Your conclusion was wrong. That's good. It's important to understand the cause. Parav says, I always end up with two answer choices which seem equivalent even after pre-thinking. Parav, is that a cause or is that a situation? If you say, one of the things that I will tell you is, if you congratulate yourself on the back to really say, hey, I've ended up with these two answer choices and 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 uh, and I'm able to narrow down from 5 to 2, and I'm going to give myself a pat on the back, you will not get a 700. I will tell you that, and I can guarantee that to you. Okay. Uh, it's really important to understand the reason why you made a mistake. And again, go read the debriefs on GMAT Club. People outline their journeys over there and see what causes their improvement from that 600 score to that 730, 740, 750 score. You're going to find commonalities. And as you find those commonalities, what you're going to find is that the reason why you're making mistakes or a mistake is very similar. Let's look at this. This is going to be the last question for the day. So what's going on over here is, and the reason why I have this question is because of the language in this question. It's really beautiful. It tells you that how you need to visualize as you read an argument. So last year, what did we do? We actually collected some refuse. We did not recycle anything. We sent everything for incineration. Now, I felt that, hey, it's much more appropriate to use a garbage truck, a garbage can instead of a truck. It's just I could get a simpler icon. So let's assume that this is the number of trucks that were sent that last year. Let's say this is the number that was sent. So how many trucks were sent last year? Can you count the number of garbage cans? 10. Okay, we'll see the poll. That's good. The poll, I think choice D over here was very, very popular. Every other choice was more or less choice D and choice E. Actually, C, D, and E were very popular. Forgive me. So again, this is a 700 level question as well. Now this year, what we're going to do is we're going to separate some stuff for recycling. How many trucks are we going to send for incineration this year? Half, 5. Okay. All right. So we're going to send about 5 trucks this year for incineration. Now I have a question for you. And again, be very confident. If we collect, how many trucks do you think we're going to send this year if we collect 10 times the amount of refuse that we collected last year? How many trucks do you think we're going to send for incineration this year if we collect 10 times the amount of refuse? The question is, if this year we collect 10x as much refuse as we did last year, how many trucks do you think we'll send for incineration? And again, before you put in the answer, read the argument once again is what I would urge you to make sure you understand what's given in the argument. Five, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's get those answers in. We end the poll. We broadcast the results. Half of you said 12, and many of you actually switched from 12 from 50 to 5. Half of you said 50, but 40% of you said 5. And I'm glad that you guys switched because the correct answer is 5. Even if you collect 10 times as much refuse, and read the argument over here to get this. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads of refuse to be incinerated to half of last year's number. So what are we saying over here? We are saying, regardless of how much garbage you collect, I'm only going to send half as many trucks as I did last year. Can everyone see this? To half of last year's number. Even if you collect 100 times the refuse, you're only going to send 5 trucks. If you sent 10 trucks last year. Okay. So if you're only going to send half as many trucks, or let's to simplify, only 5 trucks, then what is the only thing that is required to be true for the amount of residual ash to be half of what it was last year? What's the only thing that is required? That the ash per truckload not be higher. It can be the same or less, right? That's the only thing that is required. Thank you, Brian. That's the only thing that's required. Does everyone concur? Everyone agree with this? And Mariam says, if the truckload is the same volume, wouldn't that be irrelevant? No, Mariam, the truckload can be the same volume. Does it mean that the ash per truckload remains the same? Do you think a truckload of paper generates the same amount of ash as a truckload of wood? Mariam? Yeah, got it, right? Yes. So Mariam's question was, he says, hey, the truck is the same volume, so wouldn't the ash per truckload, isn't that irrelevant because the ash per truckload would remain the same? But the answer to that is no. Why? Because a truckload of wood is going to generate a lot more ash than a truckload of paper. Okay, so I mean, we can actually move forward. We have the entire process over here, but you guys are getting more and more skilled now. So let's move forward. Last year, so the pre-thinking question, which is something which is the under what condition will the ash generated be greater than 50% if only half as many truckloads are sent? The possible scenario is that if the ash generated per truckload is higher than what it was generated last year. So my assumption is ash per truckload is similar or lower than what it was last year. The only answer choice which attacks this is choice D. Choice A is irrelevant. Why? Because it's you can infer that anything that's separate for recycling was not sent for incineration. The cost is irrelevant. Why? Because we are not concerned about cost. Let's look at choice C. Choice C says the proportion of recyclable materials. Do we care about the proportion of recyclable materials if I'm only going to send half as many truckloads for incineration? No, because I'm only going to send half as many truckloads. Choice D is in line with our pre-thinking, so I'm not going to focus on that a whole lot more. Okay. Oh, man, this kills my eyes over here, but yeah. And choice E, which is also very popular, the total quantity of refuse. Does that matter? Does the total quantity of refuse matter? We saw that it doesn't matter even if you have 10x as much refuse, you're only going to send half as many truckloads. Now, when you think about this question, right, it seemed very complex, but the logic in this argument wasn't super complex. Why does it kill my eyes? Okay. And the reason for that is that once you read it slowly, you distill that logic, the answer is in front of you. And selecting the right answer, even though this was a 700 level question, became very easy once you got to that logic. The key thing is to make sure that you can get to that logic in a consistent fashion. So let's see where do we go from here? One thing that I want to make sure you understand by this is pre-thinking is a process. It's not rocket science. You understand the argument, you create the falsification question, you're able to do pre-thinking. Okay. The second thing is if you use pre-thinking, you can achieve really high accuracy. You can solve those difficult questions properly. Okay. Now, what are the next steps that you need to do? The first thing that you need to do is make sure that you go through the foundation lessons. We only solved 4 arguments using pre-thinking. If you're a free trial student, make sure you go through different argument structures. You're able to do pre-thinking in these argument structures. You probably don't need to go through the introduction to assumption, although I mean if you go through it, it's not going to harm you, but you already know this if you attended this. These are a part of your free trial. You log into your free trial, go to the critical reasoning module over there, and you're gonna see that. Okay, so if you're a new student, make sure you go through the course in a logical fashion where you understand what build a foundation towards, hey, what is an argument? Then you actually go through each of the core modules in order where you start with inference, then you go into assumptions and evaluate, strengthen, weaken. And as you go through each of these modules, you are evaluated at every 30 minutes. And in each module, you're going to see multiple concept files, multiple concept quizzes, multiple application files, and multiple practice quizzes. The idea over here is to achieve perfection. the feedback that you get helps you achieve that. In the entire CR course, you get uh, 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 you you essentially get 100 points of feedback. So you're evaluated 100 times, you get feedback 100 times, and folks who get to that 94th, 95th percentile in critical reasoning score 80% or higher on those feedback points. Okay. As you go through this, you're going to go through at least 500 questions created by the e-GMAT team to fine tune your skills. And it's not just questions, it's going to see real solutions in detail where you'll see pre-thinking done for every question. Those of you who really ask, hey, what if my pre-thinking doesn't match, or how do I develop the skills? These solutions, the audio visual as well as textual, are key to you developing these pre-thinking skills. And in this entire span, what you're going to find is this architecture where you'd see the concepts, application, and qualifying exercises integrated. So you learn a certain set of concepts, you learn how to apply them, you learn how to practice them. Okay. If you are a paid student, this is your assumption module, and what you see over here, the two things. One is you learn the core concepts, which is what's there in the free trial. Then you learn level 1 application, so you see different kinds of argument structures. Then you learn level 2 application, and then you do practice, and then you see the official questions. Ankur says, what's a good percentage on concept and practice quizzes? At least 80%, Ankur. If you go to our YouTube channel, in fact, I'm going to actually share our YouTube channel where we've started putting in case studies for scores of people who succeed. You'll really see what you should achieve over here. So if you go and take a look at this, you should be able to see how do you'd be able to see a few things. One is how do we provide feedback, and the second is how does that feedback power success. So how do you get to that 94th percentile? Do these basic things, not a whole lot. And this is a question that you were asking, Ankur. Now, how does this differ from some of the other resources that you have? Not just in total number of questions, but also the depth of solutions, also the consistency of pre-thinking. You're going to see for each one of these questions, all of these things. When you look at any of the other resources, you're going to find that these will tell you what is right versus what is wrong, but it won't tell you where you faltered. Again, this is just at a very high level, the entire structure of the course. And this is just the critical reasoning part of it. And one thing is, if you're an e-GMAT student, please don't study any other resource. You don't need to. You can get done with critical reasoning in between 8 to 10 days, right from scratch. Some examples of people who've actually done this. And you're going to see many examples on GMAT Club, but here's an example of a student who was stuck at V32. She went from a V32 to a V46 in about 15 to 18 days, if I remember correctly. And this is even though she spent those 20 odd days in 2 breaks. So 2 breaks of 10 days each. She actually just graduated from ISB. She's a brand manager right now. Another piece which is there is, many of you think about studying for the GMAT as something which is a long-term exercise. For most students, for us, it's about 2 to 2.5 months for both quant and verbal, where you learn concepts and methods, you actually perfect those methods, and you achieve exam readiness in about 75 to 80 days. Okay, with that, I'd like to thank all of you. It'd be great if you can provide some feedback in the short answer pod. Let me provide the presentation to you. Here's the session handout. Yeah, you can download the presentation. I'm going to send the recording over as well later on. So So yeah, should be able to do that. Do we have anything for executive assessment? Not a special course. No, we can go through our quant, verbal, and IR courses, and verbal and IR should be more than enough for you to prepare you for AWA. Unfortunately, when the GMAT built the AWA, they didn't change the syllabus a whole lot. They just put in more emphasis on IR, but you still need to study verbal and quant both. Are the questions on paid difficulty level high? About 40% of the questions are high. And the reason for that is you just don't, I mean, you've got to climb the ladder. You can't just say, I'm going to start with high difficulty questions and solve them, because if you just start with high difficulty questions, you'd never get to them. There's a reason why there are easy and medium questions exist. Why? Because they tell you where you're faltering. I mean, classic case in point. Um, Questions that are more difficult typically have it's more difficult to decipher the conclusion in them. So if you can't even get to the conclusion in easy and medium questions, you shouldn't be solving those, because in that case you'd just be wasting those questions. So climb the ladder, you'll have more than enough difficult questions. Algebra presentation and GMAT prep webinars. Okay, guys, a short answer pod is where you provide your comments. In the Q&A pod is where you put in your questions, because you can respond to your questions in the Q&A pod. Arjun says, is e-GMAT one-on-one course or only feedback? I think that's a question that's a very interesting question. So we are what we call as a course, which is it's a self-paced learning course that's designed to provide more feedback points than what a private tutor would provide you with. I mean, on the verbal side, we provide about 300 feedback points every 30 minutes. You get a feedback point as you're learning. On the quant side, about 250 feedback points. You also get support from our GMAT strategy experts, our subject matter experts. If you have a doubt, we address those doubts. You also, and if you are worried about, hey, how do I create my personalized study plan? Excuse me, how do I go about doing that? We have a dedicated GMAT strategy team that does that. In fact, if you watch a few of the success stories, what you're going to find is that how that GMAT strategy team has helped people achieve the target GMAT scores. So that's something which is there. So if you look at this and then you see that. What's a feedback point like? So you take the assumption a concept file, logical gap. It'll give you feedback on how well you are doing in that logical gap file. Why? Because you learn the concept, you actually get evaluated right then and there. In many files, even before you learn the concept, you are evaluated to see whether you know the concept already, so you don't spend time learning that concept. Okay, so that's a feedback point. And if you think about it, if you want to hit that 95th percentile on CR or SC, it's about, in CR you have about 80 to 90 concepts. You need to achieve perfection on those concepts. Without feedback, how do you know whether you've achieved perfection? Similarly, in SC, there are about 200 concepts. Without feedback, how do you know that you've achieved perfection? If you want to see the algebra presentation, just go to the home page, scroll down to the bottom of the home page, and you'd be able to register for those webinars. If your GMAT e-GMAT course is going to be over and you need another month, write to us, and you can extend it for $49 a month. Basharat says, why is the study plan the GMAT planner always suggests each activity component sequentially, and why not simultaneous prep time for 2 to 3 components? Basharat, this is a really good question. We get this question all the time. The key for this is when you think about, again, you're going to see, I've repeated this point a couple of times. If you want to achieve perfection, you need focus. Most working professionals can only put in about 2 to 3 hours 3 years is a stretch. I have seen most working professionals put in about an hour and a half to 3 hours per day. Now, let's say you're studying subject verb. In subject verb module, there are about 8 activities, some learning, other evaluation. Now, you can probably complete 2 to 3 activities in a day. You can then, uh, and the next day you can complete the other 3 activities, and you're 80% done with that module. So, on that particular day, if you said, I'm going to do one activity in subject verb, then I'm going to do assumptions, you're not going to retain, you're not going to achieve excellence in either one of those 5 days down the line. On the other hand, if you did subject verb, then you did verbs, then you did pronouns, essentially all of these concepts are built around that same sentence structure piece. You are in the context of a sentence, you're learning these. Similarly, extend that to modifiers and other pieces. So when you focus on sentence correction for 10 days, you learn that, you achieve excellence, and you retain it even when you're studying critical reasoning. On the other hand, if you sandwich SCN CR or SCN number properties, you're not going to achieve excellence. Now, some of you would say, okay, why is it that other experts say you should study 2 subjects at the same time? I will tell you why they say that, because most of these experts have worked in the classical test prep industry where, when you have about 12 to 13 sessions and they'll teach you 2 things at the same time or 3 things at the same time. Why? Because that's the most efficient thing for them. And so if they're teaching you 3 things at the same time, you've got to study 3 things at the same time. So they propagate that belief. But when you want to learn something, especially as a working professional, study just one thing, achieve excellence. I mean, there's a reason why if you look at GMAT Club, you'd see close to 1900 reviews for e-GMAT, whereas every other prep company other than Veritas Prep has fewer than 500 reviews. I mean, all of these are as old as e-GMAT is. Demonstrate the feedback points. I mean, Ankur, I think I sent over this link over here, data and methods. How do they lead to success? You can look at this if you want a demo of these. You can ask one of my team members. Write an email to Rajat at e-GMAT, and someone will definitely be able to do that. But again, uh, you can really see this over here, and you can see how this powers success. If you want to make sure you're practicing hard questions, then just go in Scholarinium and select hard. So our Scholarinium platform allows you to create about 1,000 kinds of quizzes. So you can practice hard questions and just assumptions, just strengthens, just weaken, um, and so on and so forth. How do you do OG quizzes in Scholarinium? You do OG quizzes with our learning platform. Um, Ankur, and the learning platform gives you, really good analytics today. Scholarinium has e-GMAT questions that you practice from. With that, guys, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. It was really good uh, having you over here. Okay, Basharat has another question. Do we have a customized prep plan for over 30 to 35 days on e-GMAT? Basharat, we have a customized prep plan for a starting score to an ending score. Because that's what you want to achieve. You know, and depending on the amount of time you spend, we can really tell you if you want to achieve a certain amount of score improvement, where should you spend that time. EG Matters have created 10,000 personalized study plans. So the world in which a test prep company gave you a plan, says, hey, follow this, is gone. The world is where the world is going with technology and data being so prevalent, is where we create a personalized prep plan for you depending on your needs. How do you do the OG quizzes in the learning platform? Every activity, every module has the corresponding official guide questions towards the end for your practice. So that's how you do that. Okay. So, and again, if you have Yes, but the options are not there, Ankur, because of the very simple reason we don't own the OG questions. Anyone who gives you OG quizzes out there is infringing GMAX IP, and you don't want to be sued over infringing GMAX IP. We as a prep company doesn't want to be sued. You as a student doesn't want to be sued. And GMAT doesn't allow anyone, and trust me, I've been behind them for the last 5 years right now, asking us, can I please license your questions and put them on my platform? The answer to that is no. So if you see that happening in any platform, then you are potentially being a part of theft. I would not do that. And I mean, we have a really great relationship with the GMAC. We we conduct boot camps with them. So if you go there, you can watch the recording of boot camp that we conducted in Bangalore a few years ago. So if you go and you can watch the session recordings, you can see GMAC presenting on our boot camp. And yes, you need to purchase the OGs. Unfortunately, that is the truth today. GMAC would not allow us to license them. That's just the truth. In fact, as recently as last week, I sent them an email again saying, guys, please do this. Our students need this. Okay, guys, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. And I wish to see you guys on e-GMAT.com. Take a look at the free trial, see if the course makes sense. If you have any questions, you can write to me at rajat@e-gmat.com. Bye bye. Have a good day.